Hello, welcome everyone to the third and final episode of our Shifting the Narrative livestream series. I appreciate everyone who's been able to stick around with us through all these episodes. It's been a long conversation that I'm hoping will keep going after this. Thank you as well to all the folks who have joined us to talk about the Shifting the Narrative livestream series. Now, just to clarify, Shifting the Narrative is a 4-part livestream series that we actually launched to focus specifically on our Shifting the Narrative report, a report that explores what narrative shift is and how it works. This episode specifically is focused on centering impacted voices in leadership. My name is Christiaan Perez. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the manager of media strategy at the Opportunity Agenda. This live stream series is produced by the team at the Opportunity Agenda. Thank you everyone who's making this happen. We're a social justice communications lab that works to advance the impact of the social justice community. We do this by shaping compelling narratives and messages while also supporting communications capacity of movement leaders through research, training, and messaging resources. It is with this goal in mind that we produced Shifting the Narrative, a report that explores narrative elements of 6 key issues: the death penalty, war and poverty, Blackfish effect, Me Too movement, gun politics, and racial profiling. By exploring roughly 5 decades of narrative shift in those key issues, we sought to identify the essential and replicable elements of past successful narrative shift efforts. In the past 3 episodes, we talked about 5 of those 7 recommendations. Those recommendations focus on everything from building long-term strategy rooted in values, the importance of dismantling problematic narratives, and much, much more. This week, we're going to focus specifically on 2 recommendations. First, the importance of centering impacted voices for those who are most affected, while also connecting them to systemic solutions. And second, the importance of broadening the implications of the problem and the benefits of the solution so it's more relatable. Now, to be clear, these recommendations by themselves do not equal narrative shifts. However, we hope that by understanding these elements, we can help provide some messaging guidance for advocates on the ground who are working to shift the narrative in vital mobilizing efforts around the country. I want to take a moment here as well to note that our panelists will delve into some difficult conversations around trauma and the struggles people encounter when they are organizing while also healing from that trauma. We want to note for our viewers and remind our folks that these webinars will be recorded and accessible at the Opportunity Agenda website for later viewing. At the end of the day, we want to make sure you have a space to listen, heal, and mobilize in a way that doesn't reopen wounds that are still sensitive. Okay. Now, to guide us in this conversation and help us understand what it means to center impacted communities in the policy discourse, I am pleased to introduce our panel. First, we have Ellen Buchman, President at the Opportunity Agenda. Welcome. Then we have Ricardo Negron-Almodovar, Legal Services Coordinator at the Opportunity Agenda. And finally, I believe she's just joining in, will be Angelina Lozado, Founder and Executive Director at Returning Hope. Welcome. Thank you. Now, to start us off in understanding more about narrative recommendations and the specific case studies, I'm pleased to start us off with Ellen Buchman. Ellen will give a brief preview about the chapter on gun politics, the Me Too movement, and how these chapters connect back to the recommendations. Ellen, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Christiaan, and thank you all of you for joining us today, for taking time out of your busy day. I hope, speaking of healing and trauma, everybody is well and safe, and I really appreciate you taking the time to have this discussion with us today. And let me also just take a second before I get into this to lift up Team TOA for putting all of this together and for our new report. It's Christiaan, it's Elizabeth, it's Julie, it's Rachel, it's Charlie, it's Tanisha, it's Team TOA. Thank you all so much. Without you, we would have no event and we would have no research to talk about today. So again, I'm Ellen Buchman. My pronouns are she, her, and I have the great privilege of being president of the Opportunity Agenda. And I'm really excited to be here to talk about, as Christiaan said, our new report, Shifting the Narrative, what we've learned and what we've been reminded in those learnings. And first, I think it's important to level set a little bit before I get into those findings, to share that when we at the Opportunity Agenda say narrative, what we're referring to is the big story, the explanation for a topic that we all carry around in our heads, like it or not. And we walk around with that big story, and in many occasions, more than one big story, and sometimes they conflict all at once, that are informed by everyday events, by our jobs, by what we call tipping points, things that are going on in our society, by our own personal experiences, our assumptions, our culture essentially is enveloping those big stories. And they help shape our perceptions, which then lead to culture shifts and then inform the policy change that hopefully we want to see. Now, sometimes folks ask us, you know what, Ellen, why narrative when I'm already working on communications and when I'm already doing message development? I would never say that message development and communications are not important. But what I will say is what they're usually focused on is short-term communication needs for that campaign or that crisis communication tactic that you're trying to solve for. And what we're talking about here and the difference is narrative shift. Narrative shift is intended to surround all of that. Think about a kaleidoscope, a beautiful image. Take a second and look. You can see transfixing dots and shapes. You can see lines. You can see bright and shiny objects. And like those short-term campaigns and messages, these objects can both stand alone in that picture, but they can also come together to create an image, a full story. And that's really what narrative is all about. It surrounds those pieces of imagery, those threads, and those short-term issues. What we find is that if we don't think about the full story, the full picture, while at the same time developing those short-term message strategies, we are left often with disconnected individual messages that might not actually make sense together. Or worse yet, we are undermining the beautiful picture that we are trying to solve for because our short-term messages might not actually consider them enough. So think about that. And we also should think about, and it's pretty easy to identify here in the kaleidoscope, the individual stories and how they play into the systemic story that we're trying to solve for and tell, which I know is a big topic certainly today. Which brings me to our new report, Shifting the Narrative. And let me share a little bit about what we've learned in that. And as Christiaan said, we took a look at 6 case studies, and today we're drilling down on 2 of them, our studies on gun politics and the Me Too movement. I'm going to share a quick snapshot, and it's going to be quick because we don't have a lot of time. So I encourage you to go to opportunityagenda.org and look at the full report because there's a lot more in there about these 2 case studies. So please go and do that and let us know if you have questions about that. But first, let me get into it a bit on gun politics. It's pretty tough to imagine on this topic what else needs to change in our country to change our culture's gun laws and certainly the culture therein. And after many, many years, we are happy to say that this research tells us that we are finally starting to see a bit of a shift of that dominant narrative that puts the Second Amendment and Second Amendment rights over human safety and lives to one that, as our report suggests, is a new 3-point narrative to be finally inching into taking hold. And those 3 points, very quickly in brief, are 1, and I in my lifetime really never thought I would see this, that the NRA is no longer potentially the most powerful lobby, and that they don't have the same stranglehold that they once did to set the dominant narrative tone, irrespective of what is going on in our country. 2, that finally the point that voters want action is starting to sink in. Now, voters have wanted action for a long time, and they've been calling for action, especially after these mass shootings. And you would believe by the coverage that this has been going on and is far too much, and that's the way we want it, to be able to shift the narrative. I also have to pause here and point out, and that it's important to note, that there have been many people, particularly in Black and Brown communities and urban centers in our country, that have been calling for this for even longer. And we need to point that out and also acknowledge it, as well as being a really contributing important force to this shift. And finally, the third point in the new narrative that hopefully is going to continue shifting in the right direction is that there is legislative support for gun sense laws, as we're terming them, and that it's a win-win for folks to take that on and to support those gun sense laws, that lives will be saved, and backers of these laws will win elections if you get into the political side of all of this. Now, there seems to be a conversation that is beginning about this, and that's the point. It's shifting to begin a conversation as opposed to the dominant narrative taking away the opportunity for all of that. It's starting to happen, which is really exciting. Now let's turn to the movement for safety of women and girls and those who identify as women and girls in the context of Me Too. Movement leaders and courageous survivors have successfully uplifted and amplified challenges to what's referred to as our country's rape culture And we're successfully seeing the needle move because of that. We're seeing a catalyzing of various tipping points of high-profile cases that's really encouraging a tidal wave of change. When everyone is encouraged to stand up and say, "Me too," it matters and it makes a difference. Here are the points that we are taking away from our research. One is that survivors not only should be listened to and believed, they should be heard. Not only should survivors be heard, they should be listened to and believed. Point two, that survivors are themselves diverse in background and that they themselves should be able to express their experiences, which we'll get to a little bit later in the conversation. Tarana Burke reminds us over and over again that the people who are marginalized are often those who get pushed aside. They are closest to the pain, and they should be closest to those whose voices get lifted up, who are seeking solutions. And point three is that this is about an institutional accountability as much as it is about an individual one. The creation of new systems, not only for awareness, but also for solutions, is being called for, and that is really starting to stick. So all of this is to say that we have to keep our eye on the vision, and we have to continue doing that and working with our brothers and sisters in these movements who are themselves connected to, as I said, the pain around these issues, the impacted folks, as we like to say. Now, in previous episodes, and I'm running out of time, so I'm going to be real quick here, you've heard from us around, and my colleagues, the importance of countering problematic narratives and building that affirmative vision. And we want to make sure that the two recommendations that we're here to focus on today also get uplifted by me, and that's centering impacted voices in leadership positions. So first, I know I'm preaching to the choir here. We've got to connect those individual stories of those who are most impacted, as I said before, with the system changes that need to be made. Think about that kaleidoscope, friends. It's the individual beautiful story and individual stories together that will work to make the system change a reality. And that's the narrative and the story that we need to tell. And with that vision, centering on those impacted folks' stories and centering on those systems that need to be changed, we will find solutions, importantly, that can impact everyone. Secondly, we have to broaden the implications of the problem, as we like to say, and the benefits of the solution, which if we're doing the first point, we're going to be having an easier time to do, and build on a culture of solidarity to make sure that no individual struggle is overlooked, because the implications are way too important, and we need to make sure of that every step of the way. And as someone who's constantly working on the importance of allyship, this is really, really critical, which we can get into later as well. All of this will only be more clear if we make sure and are certain that communities who are most impacted by the problem also have a seat and a voice at the table where decisions are being made. We need to do that, and we need to solve for doing that if it's not happening naturally. So these are, again, just a few of the recommendations that I want to uplift in our new report. I do encourage you to look at our new report. It's got others. It's really important that we all center these recommendations and more. And I want to leave it at that and just say thank you so much. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Now, obviously, there's a lot that Ellen wasn't able to get into right here, but I strongly encourage y'all go to www.opportunityagenda.org. The report, you can download it there. The chapter on Me Too and gun politics are just 2 of the 6, but there's still very important reads where you can get into a lot of different details that I recommend. Anyway, so transitioning over to the next part of the conversation. Remember, you can comment on the feed to let us know what questions you may have for Ellen or any of our other guests. We're going to have a Q&A right at the end, closer to the end of the show, which I recommend you engage in. So moving on. I'm gonna throw it over to Ricardo Negron-Almodovar. He's the legal services coordinator at LatinoJustice, based out of sunny Florida, and he's gonna tell us a bit more about election protection and all the work that's going on in Florida.
Thanks, Christiaan, and thanks to the Opportunity Agenda for putting this together and for inviting me. I'm Ricardo Negron. I'm the legal service coordinator with LatinoJustice PRLDEF out of our Southeast office here in Orlando. And I'm going to take some time to talk about the fight for Latinx voting rights here in Florida. Before that, I do want to take a quick second to acknowledge that we are in Mental Health Awareness Month. So for all of us who are, particularly in advocacy spaces and just coming off some brutal legislative sessions, please take some time for that self-care that is very much needed. So going now into the fight for Latinx voting rights in Florida. Using the topic, right, of shifting the narrative, I think it's very important to say that it's completely false that Latinx voters don't care and don't show up. In reality, from 2016 to 2020, Latinx voter participation all across the states went up over 30%. So our communities are growing, our communities are being involved. Our communities do care about who are our leaders and the issues that are affecting us. The reality is that our communities have to face barriers that are purposely set up to infringe on our ability to make our voices heard. Taking Florida as an example, now there's over 2.5 million eligible Latinx voters here in Florida. However, up until the beginning of this year, there were actually 32 out of the 67 counties that were not complying with the Voting Rights Act when it comes to the availability of Spanish language materials, election materials, voting materials in Spanish, something that has been law since 1965. It took a lawsuit brought on by LatinoJustice and partners back in 2018 and finally settled at the beginning of this year for counties to recognize that first, they actually have to comply with the law. Two, that there is a growing Latinx community here in every county. And three, there should not be barriers set up to prohibit, to make it more difficult for a voter to be able to exercise their right and cast their vote just because English is not their dominant language. So as part of that fight, now in 31 of the 32 counties, Spanish dominant voters are able to receive the Spanish materials that they should have been getting anyways, but that they weren't. And this includes obviously the ballot. It includes the materials at the polling location. It includes the vote by mail applications. It includes assistance lines for every county, and even the websites. They need to be translated into Spanish. Now, there are other counties here in Florida that, based on population, they already provide this assistance. And because of as a direct result of the lawsuit, now every county, right, regardless of population, at the minimum, they offer a Spanish ballot for a voter when they request it. So again, it's not that our community doesn't care, it's that our community has to face barriers that other communities do not. And that's where the importance of reaching our community where they are comes into play. And for example, last year, LatinoJustice and other partners launched the Pa Luego Es Tarde campaign. It was a fully Spanish election protection campaign meant to reach Spanish dominant voters where they are, with all the election information from their counties, the important dates, how to register, where to go to vote. So it's really important for organizations, for community leaders, and for everybody who has the capacity to reach other voters and potential voters to meet them where they're at. And that's how Pa Luego Es Tarde, with many other campaigns that were launched in Florida, really made a difference. Now, unfortunately, this year, we're just coming off a really brutal legislative session that ended up with the passing of SB 90, which it's really a voter suppression bill that sort of mirrors the voter suppression bills that was passed in Georgia earlier. This SB 90 we're trying to bring down barriers that make voting difficult for voters, yet this bill does completely the opposite. It makes up more barriers. It makes barriers by limiting ballot drop boxes. It makes barriers by limiting voter registration efforts. And it even limits the election protection efforts from the nonpartisan organizations who are out there on the field trying to assist voters on election day. Now, LatinoJustice with other organizations brought up a suit challenging SB 90 because it really violates the Voting Rights Act and it's completely unconstitutional. Now, in the little time that I have left, I want to make a complete shift right now and talk about a little bit about gun prevention efforts and why it's important to center Latinx voices and also to center impacted voices. As some of you may know, we're only a little bit over 2 weeks from the 5-year mark of the Pulse shooting, which was a shooting that affected mostly the LGBTQ and Latinx community here in Orlando. And we have to mention, as Latinx people, massive shootings, these incidents of mass violence are not something that happen outside of our communities, right? Most, if not all, mass shootings that have been recorded in recent years either affect Latinx individuals or happen in Latinx communities affecting Latinx individuals. So it's very important that we make our voice heard and we held accountable those who are supposed to be there to make our communities safe. And I think y'all heard the timer, so that was my time's up.
Thank you, Ricardo, for keeping your time. But don't worry, we're gonna have to talk about that a little more during the Q&A. I know there's a lot that you've been working on regarding to that, and I would definitely want to talk about more and encourage folks to post in the comments if they have anything they want to talk about. So going to transition real quick, we're going to go into another difficult conversation. We're joined next by Angelina Rosado. She's from Returning Hope Incorporated and our founder and executive director of Returning Hope Incorporated. And she's going to tell us a little more about domestic violence narrative shift.
Thank you, Christiaan. And first, I would like to say thank you for having me and giving me this opportunity to be a part of the platform that we desperately need to speak on domestic violence. First and foremost, I would like to define what is domestic violence, right? Like, that's a big question. Not many people know what domestic violence even is. For me, I like to say that domestic violence is a monster with many different faces, okay? As a survivor of domestic violence myself, my domestic violence started at 15, which I wasn't educated on the different aspects that come with domestic violence. So domestic violence is made up of, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse, verbal abuse. Now, what are those things, right? Like, what does that all mean? Physical abuse is actual physically harming someone, causing harm to someone, hitting someone, punching someone, kicking someone, spitting, pinching, right? Now, that's something that leaves marks on the outside. So that's visible to other people. Now you have the other side of domestic violence that isn't too much talked about. It isn't focused on enough because it's not something people can see visibly, right? So now we talk about emotional abuse, psychological abuse, verbal abuse. These are different forms of abuse that actually can leave a bigger scar on the inside and have a bigger impact on a survivor than anything else. So emotional abuse is, pretty much when someone nothing you do is correct. Everything you do, it's a problem. They criticize you. They have no problem with humiliating you in front of anyone. They want to belittle you. They want you to feel down. They want you to feel low. And this is a tactic that abusers do. So we call it the breakdown to build up. And it's a tactic that abusers do because they want to mold you. They like to mold their victims. And It's if I say as many things to you that make you feel as low as you can, I can also be the same person to big you up, right? At the same aspect. And now you're going to believe everything that I say. So it allows it's an unfortunate situation because a lot of victims get stuck here. And, you know, so many people ask like, oh, well, why didn't this person just leave? And these are one of the reasons why, right? One of the reasons why victims don't leave is because they have a psychological hold on them. Like it's literally like balls and chains. They're locked in because this person then broke them down so much, but also at the same hand, that person built them up. Another thing that reason why victims don't leave, which is another face, is financially. You know, a lot of abusers, they take control over the money. They take control. You end up living with them. You have no home. You have no access to the money. This person doesn't want you to have access to the money. And sometimes if you are the money maker, this person takes all your money, right? They'll keep all the money. They have control over the banks. They have the cards. They have the credit cards. They don't allow you to have access to that, which is extremely huge on why victims also do stay. Another part is verbal abuse. Now, verbal abuse is something that I have a lot of experience with. You know, for me personally, I was called every name under the sun, but a child of God, and the name that my mother put on my birth certificate. And at 15 years old, you know, growing up in my neighborhood, primarily Latino and African-American neighborhood, this was normal. This was a normal thing. You see people every day arguing and fighting, and, you know, people turn another cheek to it. You know, they look away. Hey, that's just a couple. They just fight and it's nothing. But not knowing what that is actually doing, because we don't put a name to that. We never put a name to what domestic violence is. And growing up, I had no clue. You know, I knew that abuse was physical. So I remember being 4 years old, and at 4, I witnessed my mom being dragged out of a car and beaten up by her boyfriend. And in my head, it kind of linked into if that's not happening, then you're not being abused. And then I shifted it to, well, if you're fighting back, then it's fine because you're not weak. You know, a victim, in my head, a victim was someone who just balled up. You weren't fighting back. You were timid. You were scared. That wasn't what I was. So I couldn't even put my name to be called a victim. Now, at 15, I remember when I first seen the Power Wheel, and I was a part of this organization that Safe Horizon had came to, and it was kind of around the same time of Chris Brown and Rihanna. And to show the level of ignorance that I had at the time was I was kind of like on Chris Brown's side. I couldn't believe that Rihanna would try to ruin his career. And the woman was like mortified. She couldn't believe what we were saying. She looked so scared for us, but she showed us the Power Wheel. And I remember looking at this power and control wheel and thinking, oh my God, you know, every one of these little things, I'm a part of that. So this is where I began to fight. Like, this is where, once I left my domestic violence relationship, I realized there were so many things missing in my neighborhood, where I decided, nope, I'm going to be this voice and I'm going to fight. So that's what I believe is missing in our neighborhoods. You know, I believe that holding accountability for for abusers, call them out on it. Call an abuser out. I love making abusers uncomfortable. So if I see it, I'm calling it out. Now let's have this conversation. What does this conversation look like for them? What happened to you? Why are you doing this? Have you witnessed trauma? You know, 90% of abusers, they have had their own trauma in their own life, which is why they think that this is okay. So for me, accountability for abusers, getting all these programs into schools, getting these domestic violence programs into schools. You know, if schools can teach about sex ed, they can also teach about healthy relationships. Getting these programs into different organizations throughout our communities. Every single community center should have these conversations with the kids that are there, and having more opportunities and safe spaces for victims in their neighborhoods. So for me, that is something that is it'll shift the narrative, because nobody likes to talk about domestic violence. So it'll definitely shift the narrative on giving us a seat at that table, letting survivors tell you what is it that we need, letting survivors tell us, you know, hey, this is what I want, this is what I need, this is the help that I need. Just give us that seat at that table, and we can change the outcome.
Thank you. That's a lot. I know that you have a lot more you can go into, and we're actually gonna go into a bit of that in the Q&A. So I appreciate you opening up and telling us about a lot more about the lived experiences that we need to navigate around. So I want to bring back into the room Ricardo and Ellen, so we can go into questions on all of these pieces, really. But I do want to draw particular attention to what you kind of just finished with, of kind of the importance of putting a face to the conflict, or putting a face to the issue. So Angelina, could you tell us a little more? And then I actually want to go to Ricardo, because I know that's some issues they both have navigated around the importance of having a face to the struggle.
Yeah, so we have, you know, I'm a part of many different groups that are survivor based. So what we do is, for a lot of things, you know, they put into these legislations and they put these different forms of things into play that's supposed to help survivors. But if you're not speaking to survivors, how can you help them? How do you know what is it that we need? You know, I went through a shelter system. I went through that system, and it was horrible. It was crazy. I couldn't even believe that this is something that victims have to do. You know, on top of being abused, you have to go to police. The police, this is another form of trauma, more layers of trauma that victims have to go through. And it's kind of a point where you feel as if, why am I being questioned 103 times when I'm not the person that caused this harm? You know, and that's a lot what the victims feel. Victims don't feel as if we're actually being heard, you know, and that's the issue. So for me, like, even in my organization, it's survivor led. Every single person that comes in, volunteers, helps out. These are all survivors. We connect on a whole different level. We have a better understanding of each other. And it's to understand that every survivor is not at the same healing space. Every survivor takes their time. You know, you may have a survivor that at the right given moment, that's it, they're speaking out against what happened to them. You may have a survivor that'll take 10 to 15 years to actually come out and say something. But it's even giving us that opportunity to do so. Give us a seat at the table if you want to help us so bad.
That's all right, Angelina. Particularly not everybody has a, you know, there's not like a cookie cutter response to trauma, to a situation that you go through. So the systems have to be in place, whether that person needs the support the same day that they went through trauma, or whether, you know, taking the Pulse shooting, for example, it's going to be 5 years. So there may be folks who, for the past 5 years, did not think they needed mental health assistance or whatever other assistance. And now with, you know, how it's all going to be in the news, how there's going to be many events, many remembrance, so many things happening all at once, then it might become just too overwhelming. And that's when the support really is going to be needed. And then maybe it'll be 10 years from now. So it can't be just something that, hey, if you didn't take it, you know, the first 5 days, then bad on you, there's no more resources available.
Yeah. And I also, so I also recognizing the importance of having folks kind of front and center in the movement space and in the healing space. I also do want to kind of allow you the space as well to call out what are common mistakes that folks will often, you know, keep doing when it comes to involving impacted communities in the struggle. Ricardo, I see.
I want to take a crack at this, centering it around voter engagement, right? Voter turnout, voting rights. if you are going to claim that you are fighting for the Latinx community voting rights, you better have Latinx people in your team, and you better be reaching to those Latinx communities in their language, in their jerga, you really have to connect with them and talk to them and see what they're struggling with. Do not come with a message that was prepared in some think lab way far away from here with people that have no connection at all to the community, because that's just gonna fail. One, and two, is disrespectful to the people leading the work on the ground. So sit down, grab some cafecito, un pan sobao, and really talk to the people who are leading the work and really invest in those communities.
Angela, did you want to jump on that one?
Yeah, sure. I would have to agree. I mean, I think that goes all around. If you are going to come into a community, especially communities like mine, I need you to know us. I need you to even get to know us, get to want to know us. And when it comes to helping survivors of domestic violence, are you even putting this information out there that this is what you can help with? I'm from the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and it doesn't happen. Like when I decided to start my organization, I did research first and looked around at the actual organizations that are there. And there's maybe 1 out of 5 that are located in the Lower East Side of Manhattan that would help with domestic violence, right? And these are people who they make money off of us. Like, let's just be real, right? They come to my community, they make money off of the fact that we are Latino, we are Black, we are low income. That right there is a grant in itself. And if we're going to allow them to have a seat at our table in our neighborhoods, we want them to make room. And I am the voice to let all these organizations understand that, help the people that are actually in my community. That's your job. That's what you're here for. And when it comes to survivors of domestic violence, it's not something that's talked about. It's a very hard topic for people, but you have to come with like an open heart and an open mind. When someone is ready, then they'll be able to speak, but just having that. I remember in Queens, in an organization, it was Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I came into that organization and I looked around. I didn't see not even one flyer pertaining to domestic violence. And I was so confused. And I'm like, hey, what do you guys do for Domestic Violence Awareness Month? And they're like, we didn't even know that domestic violence had an awareness month. And we don't do anything. And that was my opportunity to say, well, hey, here's what I can do and here's what I can help. I would love to have a conversation with the kids. Let's get this conversation going. And I actually ended up working there doing just that. And having that conversation, being that voice for children, but also being the voice for the community, where it's like, if anyone in our community needs help, you need any form of support, I'm here. I know what I'm talking about, and I'm willing and ready to help you.
Christiaan, can I just throw in one quick thing? Yeah, I so agree. Ricardo, Angelina, amen, brother and sister. And I would just add an anecdote. I had the pleasure and honor of getting to work with Dr. Dorothy Height when she was the chair of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And one of the things that Dr. Height used to say, and it was both a joke and it was true, was imagine the work that we could get done if people would just stop taking credit and think about who they're trying to support. Imagine the work we could get done, exactly, right, Ricardo? If people would just stop trying to take the credit for those solutions and consider those that they're trying to support. So my colleagues here have already said it, and we try at the Opportunity Agenda as much as we can to add to the equation that those who are experiencing these issues need to be a part of those solutions, and those of us who aren't necessarily experiencing them personally need to listen. And that's just the common thread that I wanted to uplift there. So thanks, Christiaan.
Yeah, and actually the follow-up question actually relates to that as well, because obviously here at the Opportunity Agenda, we're a social justice communications lab, so we work in the narrative space. We're not, we work with Ricardo, we work with Angelina, and actually you're part of our 2021 Comms Institute class, but a lot of this is about us trying to figure out the ways we can most effectively engage and be supportive of the work that folks are doing on the ground. So, in a pivot to that, I will ask Ellen if you can speak a little to the role of allyship in terms of building that space and providing that space for other folks to kind of step in, and also for Angelina and Ricardo, I'd be curious about your thoughts of how you see it working in an ideal scenario.
Thanks, Christiaan. I'll just start by saying, there's a lot to be said about being an effective ally, and the first thing related to that, as just a matter of perspective, is that as an ally, it's not up to me to say I'm an ally. It's up to other people to experience me in that way. And so for me, Christiaan, that's really about, thinking about, as I said before, what are the solutions that we're trying to solve for, and what can I do to make sure that I'm doing all that I can to seek those out from those that are experiencing whatever the trauma or the topic at hand is. Angelina's mentioned heartfelt examples of what that looks like in the domestic violence context. Ricardo around voting rights. Both of them are going to know a lot more than I am about either of the solutions every single day that they're trying to strive for. And to me, really trying to uplift that means hearing them and making sure that it's not about me. It's about them and what they're trying to solve for. And so to your point earlier, Christiaan, about narrative, keeping our eye on that, beautiful kaleidoscope that I was talking about, making sure that the solutions that we're trying to see, whether it's uplifting that everyone should have a safe environment, whether they're incarcerated or outside, whether they're on the street or at their job, whether they're on this TV show or whatever this is called, everyone should feel safe. And, it's up to us to uplift that that's our goal at the Opportunity Agenda. And we want to never forget that, while at the same time, we're hearing our friends here talk about why their solutions will get us there. So I would say those are the points that I would most make.
Angelina, Ricardo, did you guys want to jump in on that? All right, we're having the Zoom. There you go.
No, I think there's always there's a lot to try when we're really figuring out what an ally is, like what the role of an ally is. Obviously, it depends on what topic we're talking about, but overall, like an ally is someone who, while not, like for me, right? It's someone who, while not directly impacted, is someone who opens up their resources, their understanding, their empathy to the community that is affected, without necessarily seeking for that savior role, but rather understanding that when it comes to a specific issue, they sort of have a privilege of not being impacted by that issue, but they can provide support to those communities that are directly impacted, but not taking away the spotlight from the community that's directly impacted, because that's always what needs to be centered. Now that Pride Month is coming, right? There's always this talk about, everybody's an ally to the LGBTQ plus community. Major retailers are an ally because they sell rainbow branded merchandise that then they use to pay the minimal fee that it costs to participate in a pride parade. But when there are anti-trans bills happening all across the United States, they stay quiet because that will bring a backlash that will lose them their other conservative customers. So are you really an ally, or are you an opportunist? So there's that.
Angelina, do you want to jump in on that?
Sure. For me, domestic violence, it becomes a little different, right? Like, we want to make sure that we can hope that everyone sees it the way we see it, right? Because the reality is there is no right and wrong right? There's no, let me see how I can put this. This is not politics that I'm talking, right? I remember one time I did get someone that told me domestic violence is like politics. And I was taken back because I'm like, there's no sides to here, right? Domestic violence is wrong, period. There is no, oh, well, maybe, but sorta, but kinda, because domestic violence doesn't discriminate against anyone. It doesn't care what your race is. It doesn't care what your religion is. It doesn't care about your tax bracket. It doesn't care about your gender. It's here to take everybody. So for me, an ally will look like a person or an organization that is willing to put themselves there, you know, stand with a survivor, stand with a group of survivors with no shame, you know, don't feel scared to be able to say we stand with domestic violence survivors. And this is a conversation we're willing to have. You know, I feel like because domestic violence is such a swept under the rug, you know, oh, it's such a harsh topic. We're trying to take that taboo off of domestic violence, right? Like we should be able to walk into a room and have no problem with speaking on this subject because it's wrong. So that's what an ally looks like. An ally looks like for me is someone or a group of people who are willing to be able to feel and make everyone else feel uncomfortable in a room because we're ready to talk about this conversation. And if you're not ready to make everyone else feel uncomfortable about this conversation, then you're not really in it for what we need you to be in it for. You know, domestic violence is also a topic that it does bring a lot of attention. You get someone online and be like, oh, I'm fighting for domestic violence, but look at me, I'm fighting for it. You know, oh, I'm this amazing person that's fighting for domestic violence. And it's like, do you really care about helping survivors, or are you caring more that your platform is getting raised higher because this is what you're saying? So that's for me.
Yeah, no, so I'm going to have, we're running tight on time, so I'm going to do a quick last question, and then we're going to do a wrap-up question. So I'll ask you to bear with me while I do because this one is kind of, I want to get to is on, how do you make sure that when you're talking about specific struggles or specific problems, that the solutions are brought back to the broader solution? So like I'm thinking about this specifically, like there's a lot of times you'll see someone, a really, really heart-rending story where you're like, this is horrible, but then the solutions that come out of it are focused on that specific issue and they don't address the systemic issue. So I guess sorry, I know this is a really tough, fast question one, but I will say just real quick, could you just go down the line? And then, so Ricardo, Angelina, then Ellen, just real quick, what do you see as the way to approach this?
I'm gonna have to go always with community participation, but not just not centering in quote unquote one representative of the community, but multiple sectors of the community that's affected by the specific issue that we'll be addressing.
I would say for me, it's getting survivors involved so that they can be the ones to say what is it that they need, we all need. You know, again, I said it before, I'll say it again. Survivors understand survivors on a different level, and that's basically just what you need around. If you're looking to solve any issues about domestic violence, you have to have survivors at that table. There's no way that you cannot do that. You know, we have, you know, for me, one of the issues I remember speaking to my uncle about was having like a, you know how they have the molestation rape list, and everyone has to register as pedophiles or something. For me, that was something on, okay, let's do that for abusers. And I had to realize that, you know, one, that whole thing wasn't made correctly, but understanding, all right, how can this affect everybody else around you? Not just victims, not just abusers. How does this affect everyone around you? And what does that look like? How do they even categorize it? So it's education and getting survivors involved.
Big question. I'm going to jump out where Ricardo left off and uplift intersectionality and just say, for me, it's, and we were reminded of this with the research, and we're all saying it in our own ways, or at least I'm hearing it that way. We need to be mindful that the more folks that are directly connected, who have a chance to tell their stories, the more likely it is that the impact of who hears those stories will be greater and will actually be able to move the needle. In other words, the more people who can see themselves in the stories that we're trying to tell, because we are being intersectional in our approach to telling them, and being thoughtful about expansion of the numbers and the individuals and the diversity of those stories, the better. So for me, that's lesson one. And lesson two, as I said before, individuals need to be accountable in, the harms that they have committed, as Angelina said. But in addition to that, so do systems, right? And so, we need to call for that system change and that system accountability. And again, it's a point in our research that we all were reminded by, as much as we need to call for those individuals to be accountable as well. New systems can help us achieve that.
All right, now we have, like I said, this is the final. So this, can you just go real quick, just last words? This is also a space if you want to plug anything like going on locally that you want to, bring to our audience's attention. I think I want to do the reverse order now. So Ellen, I'll put you on the spot first. Just go down the list of, real quick wrap up, and then we're done. Oh, Ellen, you muted.
My apologies. I said it before, I'll say it again. We have tools, we have research at opportunityagenda.org. Please have at it. Our Shifting the Narrative report, I see, is ticking by underneath me in the picture. I also just need to uplift our guests and say what they said. So what she said, what he said. Honestly, the stories that we're telling together, combined, as I said before, to meet us where, as Ricardo said, we all are, so that we can create that beautiful vision together, is where it's at. So making sure that we're constantly working to achieve that. And we at the Opportunity Agenda have ways and tools that we can help assist in doing so. Thank you so much, everybody, for this. It was terrific.
I think I'll say two things. One is, if you're really looking at uplifting a community that you are working for and that you want to represent, rightfully so, then really talk to the community. Bring those voices to the table. Make them feel welcome, make them feel comfortable, make them feel like they can actually trust you or your organization or your entity, and that you are going to take care of them, not use them for numbers. And the second thing that I would say is that it's okay to not be a leading voice in an issue. It's okay to take a step back and support the ones who are.
I would say that for domestic violence, if the subject comes up, check your own bias. Make sure that when someone is speaking, you're not judging them. Victim shaming is something that we deal with a lot, and don't do it. If I could be just as brief as possible, don't do it, because it's the struggle. The biggest struggle in the world for a survivor is actually speaking out. And that is the most scariest thing that a survivor could do. And it's the most bravest thing they can do. So if a survivor is speaking, if that's your mom, if that's your friend, if that's your sister, brother, uncle, open heart, open mind, let them know you love them and that you're here for them, you hear them, and make sure that you allow them to understand that your door is always open.
Thank you. Once again, that was Alan Buchman from Opportunity Agenda, Ricardo Negron-Almodovar from LatinoJustice, and Angelina Alzado from Attorney Hope Incorporated. Of course, thank you again for joining us for this conversation. Hopefully this will be a start of many more conversations, and I thank you again for your time. Remember, Shifting the Narrative report can be found on our website, but also make sure you check out our panelists for all the work that they've got going on. Thank you again.